Tomorrow marks the 7th anniversary of the passing of statesman and leader Nelson Mandela, but South Africa's first democratic president lives on in many hearts and minds around the globe, especially because of his ideals and because of the place he filled in history. While some of his thinking may not be popular today, 26 years since he became president, it was fitting for that time of our history as we as a nation emerged from years of oppression defined by nonsensical legislation. Here to discuss Mandela's legacy is Sello Hatang, the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. He joins us now via Skype. A very good evening to you, Mr. Hatang, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Just looking at the title of your lecture or webinar tomorrow, The Bonds That Bind Us, Remembering Madiba in a Time of Global Fracture. I'd imagine that there is nothing more that really, resonates with the values and principles of Madiba as the experiences of COVID-19 and what they've taught us.
Thank you so much and good evening, Tepi. So I think for us, that's precisely the point. For us to look back 7 years on, what have we learned in terms of how the world needs, how we need to be relating to one another? And in a time when nationalism takes over to an extent that we want no one else in our country. We want our borders guarded tightly. Those who have repressive government are continuing to repress the people in their countries. The case in point being Zimbabwe, for example. So it's a case of us saying these are structures that we have, but poverty and inequality has exposed us and said it's now time that we look at ourselves and say, is this the picture we are proud of? And we have capable people who are looking at that tomorrow during this webinar.
And I was going to say that, speaking of Zimbabwe, this is Dangarebe, somebody who is very passionate, very vocal about those cross-cutting issues that you mentioned.
Precisely, and I think with some of us, you think of Metsi Dangarebe, and you think of her novels and the books she wrote, where she was actually talking about some of these issues that we face today. At the time, they seemed like just theory. Today, we're talking about a world that where white supremacy is still reigning supreme. Racists who were under the veil of some civility have come out in full force. Truth is no longer something we all know. It's post-truth era, as they call it. Gender-based violence is something that has become normalized. So all these cross-cutting issues speak to one thing about global fracture. As the Secretary General of the UN said, you remember during the Nelson Mandela annual lecture, when he said that most of us keep on saying that we are together in this struggle. But actually it's not true, because some are on these yachts and these big boats, and yet there are others who are just holding on to rafters, just wanting to survive.
And I'd imagine then that's where Monica Geingob, the First Lady of Namibia, would also come in as somebody who has background as a financier, but as a lawyer. If we're talking about a global justice in the fight for access to a vaccine, but the huge inequalities that we've seen, countries with resources that have been, hoarding some of those that could have saved less developed countries. But our own resilience has shown us that perhaps it is for the best that we learn to fend for ourselves.
It's so true what you're saying about how nation states are now looking after self. So it's not about global equality and equity, but actually it's about how much can we afford in terms of the vaccine, for example. And the First Lady of Namibia is someone that we've admired for the longest of time, how she cares deeply about issues of how business should conduct itself at a time like this, how greed tends to be the thing that offends people who are, for example, in government, to continue to do what they do, which is to steal from the poor, how she will reflect, hopefully, on some of the fears that Madiba expressed way back, where he was saying that his greatest fear is that revolutionaries sometimes they forget the very roots of the revolutionary struggles, and they then just turn against their people to amass wealth. And at a time like this, we have a video that we're going to be showing tomorrow, which was shot by Anand Singh way back, Video Vision, where they were saying, where Madiba says, if there's one thing that we need to be worried about when we are faced with the pandemic, is to be united, to fight it together, because it's only when we are united that we can then win against a pandemic such as this. So the First Lady of Namibia is strong in that point, that as a human rights, as a lawyer herself, rather, and also as an entrepreneur, to then say greed works usually against human rights. Let's do better.
Now, Mama Karasa Mashal also going to be on that panel. She obviously has her own experiences on a personal level, but just talk to me about how she has found this journey every year of being reminded of the love that she's lost, but the love that she can sow back into the world, into the country, learning from those lessons, sharing with us.
You know, if there's one thing that we can learn from Mom is how resilient she is. And earlier today I spoke to her, and it's a difficult time for her, as it is for the Mandela family. And I keep reminding her and the Mandela family that we don't take this moment lightly. And as a human rights icon of human rights herself, who has fought for rights of children, fought for human rights of refugees, etc. She understands this deeply, and I'm hoping that tomorrow, again, she will take us into the depths of her heart about this moment in the global context, what we need to be doing different. And when I spoke to her earlier on, that it is it's tough. And we are hoping that tomorrow she is going to just remind us not only of the love, but the love that Madiba had for the continent, the love that Madiba had for those who are discarded, the forgotten people, those who feel that they are remembered every time there's an election. Those are the people that I'm hoping Ms. Michelle will remind us again that we carry the responsibility to those people.
And speaking of responsibility, thinking of her and her work as a board chair of PMNCH, for those who don't know, that is the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. One of the most tragic consequences of COVID-19, of course, has been the lack of access to life-saving health services. We've seen more women die as a result of maternal deaths, pregnant mothers, because of COVID-19. Given the work that she does and how she's seeing further opportunities for greater coalescence of us as a community in taking care of each other.
You know, I think so. You are reflecting on something that we tend to forget. Rather, we've normalized so much that we need to be reminded every month, and it's not normal to the women during childbirth. It's not normal for little ones to die at an early stage of their life. And I think the work that she's been doing has been incredible. And this global fracture shows itself mostly in those people that would normalize their suffering. Women's suffering has been normalized to an extent that when this pandemic hit, we then started crying foul about this pandemic, forgetting that there are other pandemics with poor nations, continent, but in particular. And I'm hoping that she will again just remind us of our obligation to the future. I always say that the work that we do today is not just for us today, but it's for those who are still to be born. And that's why we need to make sure that maternal health is something that's taken good care of, and that we are careful of our conduct when it comes to issues of how those who are born, they're born with scars.
All right, thank you so much for speaking to us, Sello Hatang, CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. So you can stream into that lecture, The Bonds That Bind Us, Remembering Madiba in Time of a Global Fracture, looking at the 7th anniversary of Madiba's death.